No comfort to DeAndre Harris, the 20-year-old assistant special ed teacher who survived a beating at their hands and who, as the New York Daily News reports, is still receiving hate messages as he recovers from his extensive injuries. And joining me now, our Daily Beast columnist, Howard Dean. I'm sorry, he's not a Daily Beast columnist, former Vermont governor and Democratic National Committee Chair Howard Dean. Patrisse Cullors, founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. Leah Wright-Rigueur, assistant professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and MSNBC political contributor David Johnson. Howard Dean, you can be any Dean you want. We're gonna let you be who you are. I'm gonna come to you first, though, Leah, because Donald Trump got he was fully, he was taken apart all across the board, except for a couple of groups, white evangelicals, pretty much stood by him. But he got huge praise from white nationalists. Some of whom called him the most honest president since Washington. He's drawn their active praise. In a normal presidency, this would cause a complete rethink, right? But with Trump, why do you suppose it doesn't?
So it doesn't, because this is who he's been, this is who he is, this is what he thrives on, right? So he is someone who has really just kind of appealed to these ideas. We're in a moral moment right now. This is a moment where it should be clear as day. Any Republican any president, doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, knows that this is something that you're supposed to speak out about. But this is a guy who is essentially, right, president of the internet comments, right? The comment section of the internet. And this is who he is. This is a man who does not have moral courage, who does not have moral decency, and is not the conscience of our nation, and doesn't have the ability to speak to the conscience of our nation.
Yeah, and Governor Dean, a lot of people have been praising Mitt Romney for coming out with this forceful statement on Facebook against Donald Trump. But I have to recall that Donald Trump had already gone after Muslims, called Mexicans rapists, gone after women, gone after former Miss Universe contestants, you name it. He had offended everyone. When Mitt Romney went and begged for a job at a dinner in November of 2016, Donald Trump had already been doing that. The Access Hollywood video had happened, and Mitt Romney was perfectly happy to sit down with him and eat dinner. Do you think Republicans are getting praise, undeserved praise, for only being willing to name Donald Trump and stand up to him when it's actual Nazis that he is excusing?
Well, we don't know what went on at that dinner, but I think Mitt Romney came out of that dinner looking pretty terrible, and I think the lesson is don't meet with Donald Trump if you don't want somewhere down the line you don't want to look pretty bad. This guy is a guy who has no moral character. But the interesting thing about this, Joy, is I think this may be the moment for Trump last weekend. I think today, in the 2018 elections, if you vote for a Republican, you're supporting Donald Trump. This has now become a referendum. If you want to vote for a racist in the White House, then you better vote for Republicans. But if you want to vote for the Democrats and really have change, that's where I think America is going. And I think there's a lot more decent Americans than there are the kind of people who supported the folks in Charlottesville. And Trump is in the minority, and that's what the polling shows. So I think this may be the moment that turns America away from the Republican Party, which, frankly, long before Donald Trump was dog whistling race, gay rights, immigrants, and Muslims.
Yeah. Patrisse, one of the reasons we wanted to have you here, because as a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, you have heard all of the counterattacks against Black Lives Matter, the claims that it's Black Lives Matter that's a hate group, that the Black Lives Matter is sort of somehow a black equivalent of the Klan, and you heard some of that again after Charlottesville. How do you respond to that when you had a woman who was marching with Black Lives Matter killed by white supremacists in that city?
I always think it's disturbing when people try to equate Black Lives Matter with the KKK. It's absolutely ridiculous. Black Lives Matter has always been an organization and now a movement that is about peace, that is about nonviolence. And more importantly, Black Lives Matter is about gaining civil and human rights. And the KKK, neo-Nazi groups, are about taking away people's rights.
And, Jason, let's just, if we can show the posters, you've seen a sort of a climb down among even the people who claim this was all just free speech and save the monuments, et cetera. On the right side of your screen is the Unite the Right poster that invited people to that rally. It was hard to mistake what you were coming to with the Nazi air, the air symbols on the sides, all of the Nazi sort of regalia that's all over that poster, as well as the people listed there, all of whom are known white nationalists and proud white nationalists. And then on the left, you have the rally for the Boston free speech rally, where they tried to put a lot of American flags and sort of change the nature of what the protest was. Do you think that there is any way to separate the two?
I mean, Joy, they're going to attempt a rebranding, but, you know, it doesn't matter. You can call it McDonald's, you can call it McDonald's. It's still a nasty hamburger, right? Like, and we all know.
No free McDonald's for you?
Yeah,
you just ruined it.
I'm done. I'm done with McDonald's. But yeah, like, you know, they can't rebrand this. They can't suddenly change what this is about. And I think what's important, sort of looking forward, as someone else mentioned, like, now the Republican Party, you know, it might have been a joke before, but now the Republican Party is essentially connected with terrorists, not just white supremacists, but terrorists. And that is a problem that this president has laid at their shoulders. And the only way that he can fix it, and I don't think that he will, is he needs to not just say, hey, Nazis are bad. He needs to say, I don't want your vote. We don't want your support. You know, if you were a politician, you found out a bunch of pedophiles supported you. If you found out a bunch of murderers said, hey, I like that guy as a murderer, you would say, I don't want your vote and support. And until the Republican Party says, not just that Trump was wrong, but we do not want your support. We don't want David Dukes in our party. They're going to have a problem no matter how many different ways white nationalists try and rebrand themselves.
And, you know, Leah, we can't get inside Donald Trump's head. We don't want to psychoanalyze him on TV. But this is a guy whose father did get arrested at a Klan rally in 1927. Like, that actually happened, right? And that's not just me making that up. There's records that reveal. There's an article, I think Philip Bump wrote that particular one. He does have a family history of a certain type. When Republicans try to argue against Democrats, they immediately go to Robert Byrd. They say, Robert Byrd was in the Klan. Robert Byrd was in the Klan. Donald Trump's own personal history, not just the father's affiliations, but the discrimination against black people in housing, you know, the birther stuff, they feel is off limits. Is the Republican Party capable of dealing with even Donald Trump's own personal history, and do they have to do that before they can separate from him?
So they absolutely have to do it, right? Because what Donald Trump has done is rip the mask of civility off of this idea of the Republican Party being distinct or being different or not, capitulating to white identity politics. We see that this is a myth, and part of what the party has to do, right, is, you know, the first step is acknowledging the problem and calling it out. So kudos to the people who have called it out. But then the next step is, are you endorsing it in other ways, right, in tacit ways? Are you, say, signing off on all of this stuff that Donald Trump is doing, right, including, say, personal history, including not acknowledging the role that you have played in allowing to get to this point? So I think there is something there, something deeply important that we have to acknowledge about Trump and this kind of ties to the GOP.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, I imagine that if, you know, Barack Obama had a history that was similar to the family history. I mean, he had to do a whole speech because his pastor, who is not a blood relative, gave a sermon that he wasn't even there for. And so the idea that Donald Trump has not had to address himself to his own family history, what does that say to you?
Well, it says that a lot of Americans are perfectly fine with a bigot as long as they think he's going to provide them with a job. And that's what Donald Trump sold himself on. I mean, I was never, Joy, I was never a believer in the economic anxiety argument. But I think that the real challenge, the reason that Trump has gotten into so much trouble is people were willing to deal with the sexism and the misogyny and the violence in his background and the corrupt businesses if they thought he was going to get something done. But now it's looking like he actually can't get anything done, and he's a bigot. And that's why his base, while that 35% are never going to leave him, all the other Republicans on the side are starting to say, you know what, look, if you can't get anything done, I don't need to see riots on the television every other weekend anyway. And that's the real challenge. The fear that I think Democrats should have is that if Donald Trump ever somehow wakes up in the morning and starts to accomplish things policy-wise, he'll go right back to success.
And I mean, Howard Dean, you took some heat for once saying that, you know, Democrats need to start to appeal to the guys with Confederate flags in their pickups. But we know what the Confederate flag means. We know what those guys mean by displaying that, right? For Democrats, how do you respond to this if Democrats are still, in a sense, pining for some of those same people?
Well, that was 12 years ago that I said that, and I meant it at the time. I think at this point the Confederate flag has essentially been subsumed by the Nazi flag. And I would take be a little different from what Leah said. I think the voters already know what Trump's brand is. I mean, the Republican Party is essentially an old white party. That's who votes for them. Our party is the party that looks like the future of America. Look, I'm not trying to say the Democrats are perfect, and we've got a lot of work to do. But the truth is, We know whether this battle is the battle for the 10 or 15% of the people who voted for Donald Trump, who are basically decent people who wanted change and now are disgusted by what's going on. That is what I think is going to make the difference, and that is where Trump has damaged the Republican Party. And I do not believe the Republicans can recover between now and November 2018.
And Patrice, I'm going to give you the last word here. You've had a lot of people on the right now complaining and sort of whining that social media is kicking Nazis off of their platforms and not giving them their free speech. I guess this rally is there to address that, what they see as the closing of the door to their voices online. What do you say to those who are rallying in Boston today for what they say is free speech, but which includes free speech for outfits like the Daily Stormer?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that free speech should be coupled with hate speech that leads to people's death. And that's what we're seeing. This idea that people are allowed to go out, spew hatred, and then use that hatred to kill people, abuse people, humiliate people, is totally unacceptable. And we've seen the ACLU, after they came out saying they'd side with white supremacists, they've come out now saying, actually, we're not going to side with white supremacists. And I think we need to be looking at how we challenge what we think is free speech and how it's being spoken about in the streets and how it's impacting people's everyday lives.
Leah Wright-Rigueur, Howard Dean, Patrice Cullors, Jason Johnson, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.